Hey everyone, it's Lambomang here. Welcome back to another Pavlov Scrub to Pro video. This video has been highly requested for a long time now. The first Scrub to Pro video that I did has been like one of the most popular videos on my channel by quite a wide margin. So if you haven't seen that, I'll leave a link down below. That one covers things about how to learn how to reload, some little aiming tips and tricks, and a few other little tidbits like that. But this time, for the second video, we're going to talk about options and configs and other cool technical stuff like that. It's not as scary as it sounds though. I'm going to make it as simple as possible, and we'll start off in the headset in the game. I'll show you a few options in there. Then we're going to jump over to SteamVR bindings, and I'll show you how to set up some custom controls to make things quicker, make life easier, and how to set up push to talk as well. So we've got a lot to cover, so let's just get into it, and we'll start with going into the options for Pavlov. So let's see, settings, general. So the first tip that I have is that, actually let me just jump back out of the settings. So this area that we're in is a training range, and in here we've got guns. Lots of guns. This used to be the default starting area for Pavlov, however that has changed in the last update. You now start in this grey menu where you can see, where is it? Where you can see all of this. However, if we go to settings, under general, startup map, we can change this from nothing to either the range or the kill house. Now I like having this as the range, because what this means is that when I launch into the game, this is where I'm going to be. I can just grab a gun off the wall. Let's see. This one works. Do a little bit of a warm up. But this will also be loaded when you go to a lobby. Now if I was in a multiplayer match, once a match finishes and I go back to the lobby, the training will be in the background. So while you're waiting for the next match to start, you can sit in here and just take a few shots. You know, something fun to do while you wait for the next match to start. So that's how you do that. General, startup map, range. The next tip is under input. Now under here we have auto sprint. I believe by default this is off. I'm not quite sure what the default is these days. But just double check if you've got this. When this is turned off, what that means is that when you hold down the thumbstick, you'll just walk, you click it in, you'll start sprinting. However, if you have auto sprint turned on, when you start moving your thumbstick, after like a second or so, sprint will kick in automatically. I find it really helps when playing this game, especially if you want to get around and like, or especially if you've got one of those index controllers where the thumbsticks don't work quite right. So that is a very good option to have. So I always have that one turned on. Next option I want to talk about is this input vector. And if you know what the terms HMD oriented and controller oriented movement mean, that's what this setting is for. So what these options are is that when I'm moving in a VR game and I want to move forwards, I can move the thumbstick forwards, but this input vector changes what forwards is. So forwards could be where I'm looking. So if I was to hold down forwards on the thumbstick and then look around, as you can see, I'm moving directly where I'm looking, which is what's also called HMD oriented movement, head mounted display oriented movement. Now if I set this to offhand, which I think is the default, I think that's the default. What this means is that forward is now wherever this left hand is pointed. So now, if I look directly ahead, and I point the controller around, as you can see, I'm still holding forwards on the thumbstick, but it's now relative to wherever my hand is pointing. So that, I believe, is the default for Pavlov. However, I much prefer having it on head. And I'll show you why. So for the most part, controller-oriented works pretty well. No problems. However, there's one situation where it kind of breaks down a bit, which is when I start pointing up at the sky. So let's get a little bit of space. We'll start moving forwards. So I'm holding forwards on the thumbstick. Then if I go and point up at the sky, oh, all of a sudden I'm going backwards. I'm still holding forwards, but it gets a little bit wacky once you start aiming up in the sky. However, if I go and set this back to head, now, let me just go backwards again. if I aim upwards, I can do this as much as I want, and it doesn't throw anything off. Nothing breaks. It all just works. So I highly recommend having this set to head instead of offhand or dominant. I don't know what pawn does. I've not really played with it. I always just go straight to head. The main thing you'll have to adjust to with this though is if you are walking forwards and you want to look to the left or the right. If you were using controller oriented, you could just straight up look and you would keep going where your controllers are pointed. However, with head, that doesn't work. You'll have to get into the habit of compensating for your head with your thumbstick. So if I start looking to the right, I want to start rotating my thumbstick to the left. So if I look this way, I want to start moving that way, because then I'll be moving forwards. So, same for the left. If I look to the left, I want to start moving to the right. Basically strafing. Once you get the hang of that, it becomes very easy to move around, look around, go where you want to go. It just takes a little bit of adjusting too. But once you get the hang of it, yeah, it's going to make life so much easier. Especially if you're playing on very vertical maps. Lastly, we've got this option, Force to Grab, which is for index only. That kind of uses the squeezing of the controller to make grabbing feel better. I'm not a big fan of it though, so I've got that turned off. We'll make our own changes to how grabbing feels in the SteamVR input bindings, which I'll jump over to now, because that's where the rest of the video is going to be. We're going to play around in the SteamVR bindings a little bit, get a few other cool settings set up for both Index and Vive, as well as Rift. So let's jump over to there. Okay, now that we're out of the headset, let's talk about SteamVR bindings, because this is it's a really powerful tool that's kind of hidden away in SteamVR, and it can be a little bit daunting when you first come across it, but I'll go over it very briefly, and I'll show you some of the changes that I use for my own controllers in Pavlov. So to get to the SteamVR controller bindings, you want to take your little SteamVR window, hit the menu button, go to devices, and then down to controller settings. Here we go. Once you're in here, just hit the show old binding UI button, and you'll get this window that pops up. You can also edit this from inside VR, but it's a whole lot easier on your desktop, being able to use a keyboard and mouse. So that's all that I'm going to show off. So here we are, we've got the bindings. We've got default bindings for the game. So default bindings and then default left-handed bindings. So if you are playing left-handed, it helps to switch over to those bindings. But let's go ahead and open up the default bindings. So what we've got here is we have all the different inputs on the controller. So we've got like the trackpad, thumbstick, got your buttons, your grips, your triggers. And then we have a bunch of what are called actions. So these are things like trigger left, bolt release left, release magazine left. And what we're going to be doing in this menu is we're going to be linking up different actions to different inputs. So yeah, it's basically controller remapping. So I'll be going through setting up controls for the index controllers, but the first two tips will apply to any controller, whether it's an index controller, a Vive controller, or a Rift. And we'll start by talking about a hair trigger for your controllers. So a hair trigger is where, when you go to shoot and you pull down the trigger, instead of having to pull the trigger all the way down for it to register, you only have to pull it in like a small amount. It just makes the triggers really sensitive. And this one is actually really easy to set up. So under the triggers here, we've got use as button and use as trigger. Now I don't actually know what this use as trigger gets used for, because in my bindings, I don't have that at all, and it hasn't broken the game. So we will ignore that, and I will start with the right hand because I'm right-handed. So we've got use as button. If I click on this, actually, it would help if I hit edit this binding. Okay, so now that I've hit edit, I can make my own version of the default bindings. So we've got trigger, use as button, and we've got the edit icon. So edit, little cogwheel for settings, and here we go. Click activation threshold and click deactivation threshold. So these are the sensitivity of your triggers. So by default, it'll take like, you have to pull the trigger down 25% for it to register. I believe on my settings, I actually have this set to 10. So you only have to pull the trigger down 10% for it to register. So very small change, very slight, little bit speedier to get your gun to shoot. Doesn't sound like a huge change, but you know, in a fast-paced shooter, every millisecond counts. So we will go and do that for both triggers. Options, drag this down to 5, drag this down to 10. Now these two different values, you don't want to have them the same. You want to have the deactivation threshold slightly lower than clicked activation threshold. But you also don't want this to be at 0. So that's why I have this at 5 and I have this at 10. So that's the hair trigger setup. So that was pretty simple to do. So the next thing that I'm going to add in is a push to talk. Now there is actually a push to talk built into this game. And again, it's kind of hidden. You'll need to use SteamVR bindings to actually access that. So if you're playing on the Rift, you want to play through SteamVR, not through Oculus. So let's start with setting up how I usually do it on the index controllers, and then I'll go through and show you on the Vive and the Rift as well. So what I usually do, let's scroll down to the B button on the right controller. So right now this is set to mag bolt release right, but that is also mapped to, there we go, magazine release right, bolt release right. That's already mapped to the trackpad, so I don't need it on both the trackpad and the B button. So over here on the B button, let's edit this, and we're going to change this action. So here we are, here's all the actions in the game. So here's your cycle fire mode for the right hand and for the left hand, mag bolt release, and so on and so on. And we're just going to grab push to talk. So there we go, we got push to talk. Now this is going to make things a lot easier if you're trying to record for YouTube or stream on Twitch, because the built-in mute button in the game doesn't always work, which can be awkward when you're rambling to yourself or talking to Twitch chat, and then other people in the match are hearing you and complaining about it. It's not a good time. So that's how I set up push to talk for the index controllers. So let's jump over to Vive, and then we'll jump over to Rift. So current controller, let me switch this over to Vive. Okay, default bindings. So let's have a quick look here. We've got less buttons to work with, but here we go. Here's one that's not actually mapped at all. Menu on the right hand. Yeah, let's start there. All right, let's go button, click, push to talk. Done. I don't know why it's not mapped like that by default, but yeah, there we go. Easy enough to do. Actually, while we're here on the Vive controls, I'll just show you how to use touchpads quickly. So there is we've got use as button, but there's also use as D-pad. And this is what you want to use if you're trying to set up a trackpad as like 4 different buttons. So here we go, north, east, south, west. That's how they're mapped to bolt release, opening up the buy menu, releasing the magazine, and cycling the fire mode. So I would recommend leaving those at default. But if you do want to change like what those 4 virtual buttons do, that's how you do it. You do it under use as D-pad. Now the Rift controllers though, don't quite have as many buttons to play with as the Vive and the Index. So let's go back to the default bindings. Let's see if we can find a good spot for push to talk. Let's see, what are the B and A buttons mapped to? So B is where? Here we go. Mag bolt release, cycle fire mode. You're gonna want both of those. Let's try something. So under users button, if I edit this, I've got this section here called more options. And so I can map more things, more actions to the one button. So we've got single to cycle the fire mode, double click. So I can map different things to a single click and a double click. So if I wanted to, I could map cycle fire mode to double instead. Where is it? Cycle fire mode. And then on single click is when we do push to talk. So if I press this button once and hold it down, we'll be able to talk to people. However, if I just straight up double click it instead, it'll change the fire mode. However, the buttons on the Rift controller are touch sensitive. They know when you're pressing the button in, but they also know when your thumb is just resting on top of a button. So we could try doing that instead. So let me switch this back over. Double click is back to nothing. Where it was cycle fire mode, right? Well, let's go touch instead. So now, whenever my thumb is resting on the A button, push to talk will be activated. I would actually have to hop in with my Rift controllers and see how that is in action, but that could actually work pretty well. Heh. But either way, there's plenty of options to work with here. Have a play around with that, see what you prefer. Let me know down below what you prefer, because I don't really play on my Oculus that much these days, since I've got the Index. So these options will be pretty similar for all three types of controllers. So you'll have the single, the double, the long and the held I don't usually use that much. Touch, however, only works on the Rift and the Index. So on Rift and Index, the buttons are touch sensitive. They know when your thumb is just resting on them. Vive controllers, they're not, because really you've only got the trackpad as virtual buttons, and then you've got the menu button up the top. Actually, if I jump over to the joystick, the thumbstick, where it's set up as user's button, I could set it up similarly. So click and touch, I can map stuff to when your thumb is just resting on top of the thumbstick, which would be similar again for Rift and Index. So maybe you might want to map push to talk onto that instead, but I think having it on the A button or the B button would be better, because yeah, the A button, the cycle fire mode, don't use it quite as much as the other buttons, whereas the stick is used for buying and for snap turning. I do wish, however, this little circular part on the controller, that part is touch sensitive as well. So theoretically that could be used as an input when you're resting your thumb on it. However, there doesn't seem to be any way to actually map anything to it under the SteamVR bindings. I really wish there was, because that could be cool as well. Just rest your thumb on there for push to talk. If someone from Valve was watching this video, please add that in, please. That would be really fun. That'd be cool to have. So those are the two main changes I would make no matter what VR system you're on. But now I'm going to talk about a few Index specific things. Because yeah, once you've got all these inputs, add in the finger tracking and the pressure sensitivity, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. So let's start by talking about the actual finger proximity, because by default, the grabbing sensitivity is a little bit odd. So let's start by, what have we got? We've got user's grab, user's force sensor. I've never quite gotten the hang of either of these, so we'll delete both of them. And we're going to add in a button. Click, grip right. So now we've got a button, and whenever the sides are pressed, it'll grab. But now we want to define what pressing is, because we've got two things we can work with here. We've got your finger proximity, how far away your fingers are from the controller, but we've also got how hard you squeeze the controller. So if we go to the settings for this input, for this button, we have the click activation threshold and the deactivation threshold once again, but we also have generate click from. And so we're going to have a few things under here. We're going to have pull, force, and default. So pull is going to be the proximity, which is, let me grab a controller. Pull is going to be how far away your fingers are from the controller. So when you're holding your fingers out like this, it's going to be like 0. When you pull your fingers in all the way, it's going to be 1. Think of this as like a trigger, like a virtual trigger essentially. Force is going to be how hard you're actually squeezing the controller, which again is another trigger style thing. It goes from 0 to 1. So for this, we're going to use pull, because I just want to be able to just grab the guns. So if I go pull, then I can change the activation threshold. Now, unlike the hair trigger, I actually want this to be not very sensitive. So I think about there, 85 to 80 is usually what I have that at. And the reason why I have this one not that sensitive at all is because when I'm holding a gun and I want to go to reload, I want to just be able to straight up let go of the gun as quickly as possible. If you have that too sensitive, you'll go to let go and it won't, it won't let go straight away. So your gun will kind of follow your hand a bit and it just looks a bit odd. It's more of a cosmetic thing than anything, but this will also help if you've just got your hands down by your side and you're kind of like holding them like this. You're not actually grabbing the controller, but you're also not completely letting go of it based on the finger proximity. So I find 85 to 80 is a really nice value to have. And so then I go ahead and do that for both sides. Button, click, grip left, options, pull, 85, 80. That'll make the grabbing on index controllers feel a whole lot nicer when you're playing. But like I mentioned, we also do have the force. We have how hard you are squeezing the controller. And what I can do with this is where the real fun starts. So, grip. If I go ahead and add another button, let's go release magazine right. This is what I like to do. So, we want to put this on force. Let's put this on really high. So, what I've just done here is I've set it up so that when I want to eject a magazine from my gun, all I have to do is squeeze my controller. I don't have to hit any buttons. I just squeeze and it's gone. Which we did by setting this generate click from to force instead of pull. So that's one half of it. The other half, on the left controller, we do the exact same thing. Button, click, except this time we're going to do bolt release right. Once again, set this to pull. Set it not very sensitive at all, so it's hard to accidentally trigger it. So now, when I want to reload, once I've fully emptied out a mag on my gun, all I have to do is squeeze this controller, grab another mag, put it in, squeeze this one to release the bolt, and start shooting again. And that's it. It's one of these things that sounds like a very small change, but it shaves off a pretty significant amount of time when you're playing a fast-paced shooter. And even if you're playing something more casual like zombies, being able to reload, once you get the hang of it, it is very fast to reload. And very helpful when you're getting swarmed by tons of zombies. So that's just a quick example of things you can do with SteamVR bindings. You can have a play around with this for yourself. Maybe, and actually here's something I just thought about, which I should touch on anyway. So the default bindings have use as button, wheel click right. So the default bindings are set up so that when you have the buy menu open, you can either buy stuff by clicking in the right touchpad or pulling the right trigger. Now the reason for that was because there was all those dud index controllers that were sent out where the thumbsticks wouldn't click in properly. They made it so you could select stuff with the trigger, which sounds okay. The problem is that some custom maps like to map this wheel click right action to a jump button. So there's a few CSGO maps that have been ported over, a few COD maps that have been ported over that have all got this jump thing. So with the default bindings, what's going to happen is that every time you shoot, you will also jump. It's a bit annoying, but I'll show you how to fix that, and we might have a little bit of fun with it as well. So that's this, wheel click right. Let's get rid of that. We'll start by getting rid of that, so now whenever you pull the trigger when you're on one of those maps, you won't jump, you'll just shoot. But then once you've deleted that from there, you'll want to go down to your thumbstick, and we want to add another button quickly, because if we just delete it, we won't be able to buy anything. So we've added another button. Where is it? Click, wheel, click right. Where is it? There we go. Wheel, click right. Okay, cool. So now we can actually still buy stuff. So on my personal bindings, what I do is I go over to the left trigger, because I'm right-handed, so this left trigger barely gets used for anything. I don't do dual wielding. I don't do two guns at once. So this trigger basically doesn't ever get used. So we'll go and add it over here. Button, wheel click right. So now if I am playing on one of those maps with the jumping modded in, I can just jump by pulling the left trigger. So that's what I normally do. But I just thought of doing this now while recording this video, which is that because we've got this squeezing the controller set up as a button, I could just go ahead and edit one of these. Wheel click right. So now, whenever I squeeze my left controller, that's when I'll jump. I do like having grip buttons set to jumping. It's something I like to do in my prototypes. So now that I've thought of this, yeah, I'm gonna have to try it out. But again, it's just an example of the kinds of stuff you can do with SteamVR controller bindings. It is a very powerful tool. It's very daunting when you first look at it, but the basics are buttons, D-pads, triggers. That's your basics. If you want to do anything more advanced, you can start to play around with it, start to learn about more of what everything is. But that should be enough to get you started. One last note is that under this menu here, you've also got community bindings, which is where, if I wanted to, I could say, for example, upload any binding changes that I make to Steam Workshop, and then other people can download them and play around with them, which I will probably do with these index controllers. If I do that, the links to that will be down in the description, unless I can't link to them. I'm not sure if I can. If I can't link to them directly, I'll leave the name for them so you can find them under community bindings. But as you can see, there are a ton of different bindings here, some from Pavlov League players as well. So if you want to like have a look through these, see what other people are doing, get some inspiration for your own controller bindings, this is a very good way to do it. Yeah, wow, there is a lot of bindings. But yeah, that's pretty much all the settings that I have. That's how I have my Pavlov set up. This is how I like to play. And I hope you all learnt some pretty cool things from this video. Hopefully it gives you some ideas on how you want your settings set up. I definitely recommend checking out SteamVR controller bindings. It's going to change how you play so much. It's going to make your gameplay experience so much better. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. If you want to see more cool VR FPS stuff, hit that subscribe button because this is the place to be for all that fun stuff. And I will see you all in the next one.